Welcome in to the Barnes on Bama YouTube channel. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and if you're new here, consider subscribing. Tuesday saw SEC Basketball Media Days, and I was going to put out a video yesterday, but sorry about that. Me and my girlfriend had gone to the Post Malone concert. He was in Pelham, so I wanted to get this video out, make sure everybody could know, what all was talked about at SEC Media Days. Nate Oates, Mark Sears, Latrell Wrightsell were all there. And just want to make sure everyone was in the loop as to what was said, because we are just one day away from Alabama playing competition that is not themselves. We have the charity exhibition that's going to be happening against Wake Forest. It's going to be happening in Boutwell Auditorium in Birmingham. That's going to be happening tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. if you're watching this when it comes out on Thursday. Friday, October the 28th. At 7 p.m. That is going to be live streamed on the Hibbett Sports YouTube channel. The Next Round guys are going to be doing the commentary for it, and there should be more information coming out about that here very shortly. I think there are still a couple of tickets available if you are interested in attending. It's bamaandboutwell.com. So, as I mentioned, SEC Media Days happened in Birmingham, and there is quite a lot of news. So, first things first, Alabama was picked to win the SEC. This comes after Alabama was ranked number 2 in the preseason AP poll. The media selected Alabama first in the finishing for this season. Nate Oates, made a comment about it that he was hoping that they would pick him 5th because Alabama's been picked 5th 3 times. The first 2 times they were picked 5th, they won a double in the SEC, winning the conference regular season and conference title. And then last season, they made their first ever Final Four, and that was the 3 times they had been picked 5th. He knew it wasn't a realistic, possibility just due to the roster that he had, and mentioned that, if it does mean that he's going to have to come up with some other level of motivation for his players, he would take the roster he has today over being picked 5th. Just kind of was making light of the situation, making a joke about it. In terms of the preseason teams, Mark Sears was picked to the first team All-SEC preseason, and Grant Nelson was picked second team All-SEC, as well as Mark Sears being the preseason player of the year, right? This is no surprise. When Mark Sears announced that he was coming back, he was kind of a shoe-in for that award. He definitely is going to be on the list for preseason player of the year. I definitely think that he has the ability to win that award if Alabama has the success that many people are envisioning that this team can have. Then the thing kind of shifted when Nate Oates was talking. There were some questions about availability as it comes to the scrimmages and the first game, and Nate Oates kind of addressed the availability and the injury issues. So what you need to know in terms of injury is that Latrell Wrightsell is going to be out in the Wake Forest exhibition, as well as Aiden Sherrill. Both will be out for the Wake Forest exhibition that's going to be happening tomorrow. However, Nate does expect that Latrell Wrightsell will be available for the Memphis exhibition that's going to be happening on October the 26th, and then expects Aiden Sherrill back by the first game, right? Chris Youngblood, as we've mentioned on the channel previously, is out until mid-December. Some of the reports that we've heard are maybe around the UNC game, but obviously they don't want to rush him back. They want to make sure he fully heals. Nate has said he will be back by SEC play, but how much before SEC play kind of, is up in the air until they kind of see how he's progressing. He's currently in a boot, but, as for now, that's what we kind of seen. There was a comment mentioned that Grant Nelson had, been held out of practice a little bit. Nate said that was kind of fully precautionary, fully, getting him, healthy, getting him some rest. But the only ones that are going to be missing this scrimmage, from what he said, was Latrell Wrightsell, Aiden Sherrill, and Chris Youngblood. Latrell Wrightsell was asked about who he thought was kind of the most underrated player. Obviously Cliff Amore and some of the others are getting all of the hype when you hear about this incoming roster, obviously with the additions and bringing in one of the best shot blockers in the country to a team that definitely had some defensive woes last season. But the person that Latrell Wrightsell mentioned was Jaron Stevenson. And the reason I want to bring that up is the reason he said Jaron is he mentioned how good he is at shooting the three and how good he is at dribbling the ball. and then his ability to guard 1 through 5. Latrell mentioned that, hey, if Mark or myself are out, he's willing to guard the 1, but, if we have a center out, he can guard the 5. And the reason I mention this is a lineup that we have heard, and I floated around, is Jaren Stevenson potentially playing the 3 is a possibility with Chris Youngblood out. Do I think it's the most likely scenario? Maybe not. But I have heard that lineup thrown around a couple of times, and it definitely sounds like that is a possibility due to the skill set that Jaren Stevenson brings. Obviously, that would be an absolutely massive lineup with a front court of Jaren Stevenson, Grant Nelson, and then Cliff Amore. But, we will see if that's what Nate Oates ends up rolling out there. Obviously, these exhibitions are just to kind of see what Alabama looks like against other competition. If you're not familiar, Alabama lost by like 30 against TCU. We lost to Wake Forest. Alabama historically has actually not been that good in these exhibitions. A lot of them have been closed-door scrimmages, but typically in these scrimmages and exhibitions, the last few teams have not been that good. So I wouldn't worry too much about what you see. Obviously, it's very preliminary, but I am very curious to see what happens when Alabama faces competition that is not themselves. Then, Latrell, Mark, Nate, we're all talking about the newcomers. And the person that you hear out of everyone's mouth, and I've mentioned him on here before, but the name and the person that most people are watching out for is LeBaron Philon. LeBaron Philon is the guy who is kind of making waves as it relates to the newcomers for this season. He's the freshman that maybe was not the highest rated. That would be Darian Reed or Aiden Sherrill. But LeBaron Philon is somebody that on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively, has definitely been making waves and is somebody that Nate Oates, as well as many others that I've heard, will be competing for minutes, will be playing this season, and is a name that you should know because he will be getting significant minutes this season, especially with the way that Nate likes to run guards and definitely likes people that can get physical defensively. Then there were some questions talking about the defense, right? It's very well known that Alabama's offense last season was absolutely incredible. They ended up finishing second in offensive efficiency. But Nate was quick to mention, for anybody that thought Nate is just an offensive coach, the 2 seasons that he won doubles in the SEC regular season and tournament title, they had a top 5, and I think they were 3rd defensively in efficiency. And so, Alabama had a coach leave to take the UTSA job last season, and he was set to hire a new assistant. And they asked about, how did you hire that new assistant? What went into that decision-making process? And Nate kind of said, hey, we were able to take our time, and we were able to go after a bunch of guys, and our simple thing was everyone we interviewed, I told them, if you can't coach a top 5 defense in the country, don't even bother applying. I don't want to talk to you, right? At the end of the day, Nate's whole point for this assistant was somebody that could help with developing players, but that most importantly could coach a defense, right? That was his goal. He wanted to be able to coach a defense. He knew that with him and with Pannone, they were going to be able to get the offense figured out. But the defense was the thing that was lacking, and it was the thing that held us back the majority of last season. So that was what he went for when he went to hire his assistant coach. He lands on Bryan Adams, who has some experience in the NBA as well as a couple of college teams. And Latrell Wrightsell was asked about Adams. And Latrell mentioned that, not only is Adams obviously like living and breathing defense, he also has even changed around how some of the practices have been conducted and how some of the practice schedule has been to where some of them are even more defensively focused than they have been in years past. And this is a little surprising even because the one thing you often hear about freshmen and newcomers coming into Nate's system, they'll ask the players like, hey, what's one thing that surprised you? And often they'll say, everybody talks about Nate as an offensive guy, but on practice, all he harps on is defense. Well, it sounds like, based on what Latrell's saying, that with Bryan Adams, this has been ratcheted up even more, and there's even more emphasis being placed on defense. The thing that people are more worried about is the number of stops that they're getting on defense, maybe not as many points that are being scored because they understand the level of scoring that they have the ability to have. So in practice, it's much more defensive focused. This is really, really good news for anyone that watched Alabama's defense last season. It was abysmal at times, and definitely if you can bring in Cliff, as well as, Aiden Sherrill, Darion Reed, LeBaron Philon, Chris Youngblood, Houston Millette, Aiden Holloway, right? You bring in all of these guys. I think that if you can get the defense to be at the level that Nate Oates wants it to be, this team has the ability that sky's the limit, and winning a title is definitely in the cards, right? On top of the Brian Adams piece, there was a question that was asked of Nate Oates, like, what did you do as a coach to kind of try to get better this offseason? And Nate mentioned that obviously a lot of it was, he goes to NBA training camps and he was talking to other coaches, studying what Europe's doing, studying what the NBA is doing. But he also specifically mentioned about going and speaking to, going to Knicks training camp and speaking to Tom Thibodeau around defense. Speaking of Thibodeau, that's somebody that Brian Adams had worked for before. So again, a lot of the emphasis this offseason was around defense, around how to get better, also around how to make his offense even more efficient, because as Alabama becomes more efficient, teams see how Alabama plays, so other college teams try to replicate it. So in order to stay ahead of the curve, you have to just keep learning. So Nate talked about kind of meeting with different people and how he could potentially do that moving forward. And then the final thing that, kind of was asked about is, what are the expectations set? And the expectation, Littrell kind of put it most simply, our expectations for this season is we want to win 4 championships. We want to win the Players Era in Vegas. We want to win the SEC regular season and conference, and we're coming for the national title, right? Obviously, the way that the team looks at being able to do this is by increasing their defensive efficiency from last season, keeping at that same level that they had on offense. Obviously, being able to, potentially, the question also was like, hey, are you sure that you're going to be able to figure out the minute situation, right? Obviously, competing for a championship is great, but, one issue when you have a ton of players able to play is how do the minutes work out? And Nate basically put it as, hey, I'm not saying everyone's going to get as many points as they might want or as many minutes as they might want. But the whole idea of this is how good are you when you're on the floor, right? Because I'm going to reward people that put in the effort. I'm going to reward people that do well at practice. I'm going to reward people that make the team better while they're on the floor, right? Are we better offensively? Are we better defensively while you're on the floor? If the answer to that question is yes, then I'm going to reward you with the minutes, right? Because at the end of the day, if our goal is to win a championship, it should not matter if you're on the court for 10 minutes or 22 minutes. If we're winning games and we're getting closer and closer to our goal, then we are being successful as a team, right? At the end of the day, this is a team game. This is something where individual stats, are great and all, but at the end of the day, the goal is to win a championship. This is the reason why Mark Sears came back. This is the reason why Grant Nelson came back. This is the reason you brought in the players you brought in. And that is the goal at the end of the day, to win a national title. And so everything is kind of pushing towards that goal. And they felt like the one thing that was holding them back was defense. So they addressed that in Brian Adams and in their portal additions, with even LeBaron Philon Aiden Sherrill, all these guys from a defensive perspective, Chris Youngblood, right? And then Cliff, right? You bring in the people that are going to help you achieve that goal. And so that is the goal at the end of the day, is to try to win a national title. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. Just really wanted to make sure everyone knew what happened to SEC Media Days, what all was talked about. Like I said, Nate Oates, Mark Sears, Littrell Reitzel all were there. And it was really, really great. I know there's some videos, the full-length interviews are on Alabama's YouTube channel if you have not seen them, but this is kind of the majority of what was mentioned. If you do appreciate the content, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Peace.